Greetings. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. I'm Lexi, and welcome back to another Walk Magick video. So today we're going to be going through the key points of Liber ThIShARB, and I will give you some of my thoughts and experience thereon. Let's begin. Liber ThIShARB, subfigura 913. First note that the word ThIShARB is Bereshith backwards. Bereshith means in the beginning, and it's the very first word of the Hebrew Torah. Crowley chose this title to indicate that the main practice of this text, thinking backwards, is in order to discover past lives, and that's what this text is first and foremost about. However, going back before the beginning of one's life can also indicate the hidden purpose of this text, which is discovering the immortal soul as a component of the source of all creation. This soul has been present through all of these incarnations, and we want to try to connect that thread of what this soul or this particle of God has experienced by going back through key points that will pop up in visions from doing this meditation. So the first practice is all on past life regression. The second is using the information you receive to discover key facts about your individual nature and using them to determine whether you're suitable to cross the abyss. Third, there are many different questions that are used in a meditative context to help train your mind to think in a certain scientific manner. Liber ThIShARB is first and foremost for an exempt adept, the Adeptus Exemptus. So that's in Chesed, in an order like AA. This means that this magician doing this practice has long since attained knowledge and conversation, and are basically at the end of the second order. One of the most beneficial aspects of this text is learning how to see that thread of the Holy Guardian Angel in one's life through key moments, key experiences. This text also fortifies one's mind to think like a scientist, as I said. Now, keep in mind, you can probably do some of this text at any point in your magical career. However, you need to be proficient in asana and dharana. Asana, stillness of body, being able to sit in a meditative posture in perfect stillness for long periods of time without disruption, without twitching, without moving involuntarily or due to discomfort. So you have to train your body. And dharana is stillness of mind, being able to create images in your mind and hold them, which can be very difficult. Pause the video if you don't believe me and try picturing a red circle, a perfect red circle, and hold that image in your mind for just a minute and see if it moves around, if you could really hold a red circle perfectly in your mind. Sometimes I've done dharana, and at the beginning, it was hard to even get the image of a red circle when I wanted it, let alone hold it without it changing shape or becoming imperfect or changing size, whatever. So you have to be proficient in asana and dharana at the very least. Past that, if you're actually following an AA curriculum, if you're in the order, you should be an exempt adept when you're doing this practice. So, to continue. Though this text deals with previous incarnations, and visions of a past life are likely to be when death was occurring, I'm not going into theories of what happens after a magician dies. I do have a video about necromancy on this channel, which talks a little about that. And after this video, I plan on working on 3 Liber HHH videos to cover its 3 main practices. The second practice, so it'll be the second video, deals with conquering the fear of death. So in that video, I will expound greatly upon the topic of theories about what happens after death. Keep in mind, our karma greatly determines our incarnations, as the soul seeks a fetus which is suitable to a life path. So what I will say is just this: we no longer, after death, have a brain to process experience. So generally, for a normal person, after they die, everything becomes darkness. Those who are trained in astral abilities in life may be able to remain semi-conscious on the astral plane for a while, after death. But even then, the astral plane is vast and has many planes which can easily be confused for the world of physicality. In short, matter and energy cannot be destroyed. They just change forms. We do know that matter carries experience, which helps change its shape. We do not really know about energy from a scientific point of view, but we can assume based on the experience of other magi that our experiences set energy into motion in a particular direction. So in this text it talks about sankharas, which I'll expound more on later. They are very related to karma. I think of sankharas as the direction which our actions have set our energy into motion in a particular direction or trajectory. Thus, that energy goes forward from vehicle to vehicle based on the set trajectory. As magicians, it is our duty to know our will and our true will, and then set our course in the correct direction, seeking out the experiences we need to best accomplish our great work. So sankharas are like the direction the energy has gone, but it also connects to certain karmic experiences. And those sankharas, as I'll talk about later, can be one big lump of them, or they could be dispersed into many smaller particles or lumps and spread amongst different people. Well, we'll get into that in a second. So, Liber ThIShARB, the text begins, quote, line 000, it may be, 00. It has not been possible to construct this book on a basis of pure skepticism. This matters less, as the practice leads to skepticism, and it may be through it. 0. This book is not intended to lead to the supreme attainment. On the contrary, its results define the separate being of the exempt adept from the rest of the universe and discover his relation to that universe. End quote. So one should always be extremely skeptical with all magic, especially concerning visions. The final point from the above quote is the most important, at its most important, hints for the exempt adept to distinguish themselves from and discover their relation to the universe. To discover one's true will, there are several things that can help. Firstly, keeping a magical diary with the utmost detail. By doing this over many years, you will find key moments in your life which you will be able to thread together and weave a pattern of that which has called to you as the most important things in your life, which you know by experience that you then need to do. I'll give examples later. Then, by discovering past lives, you will be able to trace your karma as well as those experiences which have transcended this incarnation, and thus call to you as being so important you must do that thing. More on this later as well. Really quick, I want to quote Crowley about past lives and explain a little. This is from chapter 37 of Magic Without Tears, which we're going to go over in depth in the future in a Magic Without Tears playlist. So chapter 37, quote, "What do I mean when I say that I think I was Eliphas Levi? No more than that I possess some of his most essential characteristics, and that some of the incidents in his life are remembered by me as my own. There doesn't seem any impossibility about these bundles of Sakhara being shared by 2 or more persons. We certainly do not know enough of what actually takes place to speak positively on any such point. Don't lose any sleep over it." End quote. We have a theory made famous by Eliphas Levi that after a person dies, their essence, what is vulgarly called their soul, or more precisely the ego, or the ego consciousness, remains in an astral body until either reincarnation into a fetus whose karma is fit for them, or else deteriorates on the astral plane for a second and permanent death occurs. If they reincarnate, they enter a fetus between 3 to 6 months of the fetus development, gestation, 3 to 6 months of gestation. The brain itself does not have memories of the past life, but the body of light, which has entered into new hosts, certainly does. I believe that the block of direct insight into past lives is to shield us from all of the trauma and useless information of previous lives. Our mind can only retain so much, a sort of human coping mechanism. However, should one try to do certain practices to draw out the information of past lives, they can gain fruitful insight into their nature and true will. By looking into the past, we can more easily see our future. So for Crowley, saying that his belief in being Eliphas Levi in his past life means that he possesses some of his characteristics as well as some of his memories, it doesn't necessarily mean that he definitely was that person. However, he saw life from that perspective of being Eliphas Levi, entered into the mind of that person, and shares enough characteristics which he finds it then plausible to have possibly been Eliphas Levi. Doesn't mean it's 100% certain, but he possesses characteristics and memories from that person, and that has shaped him in this life. How it shaped him, we'll get into when we're doing past life regression work in a moment. But that two or more people can perhaps share these characteristics and memories, or the Sakhara, therefore have both been said person, may seem baffling. Crowley uses the term Sakhara, that two or more people can possess the Sakhara of the same deceased person. Sakhara are one's actions and experiences, and interplay with their karma to determine what their next incarnation will be like. According to Crowley, Sankharas can seemingly be dispersed amongst several people. Alan Bennett describes Sankharas as seeds which scatter in the earth to build up new life. I suppose that these things follow a pattern similar to energy, that energy which leaves the body post-mortem can be dispersed and carry a portion of Sankharas with it. Crowley admits we do not know more than that at present. Anyways, so that is what is meant by seeing one's previous incarnations. You want to draw out visions from your body of light, which has the impressions from previous incarnations in it. I opted for making a list and writing down as much information about each person who I believe I was in a previous incarnation. I try to place them in chronological order, and next to each name, I wrote out paragraphs about each identity. I then looked for any threads which laced these identities together, whether it was characteristics of their personality, or if they shared experiences which seemed in line with my own. I took that as an indicator, well, these experiences keep happening, so it's either something I need to do or something I haven't learned that's karmically causing that to happen, like sort of like an ordeal, or just a true will indicator. Let's say through many, many incarnations, you keep writing music, and you love music, and it's not just in this incarnation. Well, maybe you should look more into music. It's possible part of your true will may just be to be a musician, if you see what I mean. Note that in addition to Liber ThIShARB, glimpses of past lives can occur during our dreams or while practicing asana after you've been at this practice for many months or even years. Even well after you finish this practice, seeing something as you go about your mundane life can trigger a vision of a past life. I'll give my own experience. For instance, I once saw an image online of a saltire, or saltire, also called the St. Andrew's Cross. And it was used in a joking context in the image, being used as a clothing rack, which was kind of funny. Seeing that image was enough to trigger a 30-second vision of myself in a previous incarnation being tortured upon one of them. The memory was so detailed and vivid, I could feel the pain of a red-hot iron poking my skin while I was attached to it. When the vision ended, I was literally shaking and sweating profusely. I supposed at that time that I was the victim of either the French Inquisition or some other such malefic order in a past life. Considering my predisposition to the occult now, it's likely I've practiced for many incarnations. So it isn't too unlikely that I would have been caught and tortured as an heretic. Now, with those bits of information out of the way, those theories, let's continue with the main body of text from Liber ThIShARB. We get a major warning in lines 1 and 2. Basically, do not attempt to cross the abyss until the absolute success of this book is made. Success in crossing depends upon the adept's attraction to Binah, but greatly more so is dependent upon their karma. If you have not unburdened yourself a great deal, the karma weighing you down is just like carrying baggage on your back through the desert. Too much, and you will be exhausted and succumb to the sun. Too little provision, you won't make it. In short, what I'm saying is, too much karma, and your jump across the abyss will result in said karmic baggage weighing you down so that halfway across you fall to the bottom and never heard from again, or else are flung back below the abyss, or as some say, and Crowley writes in this text, you could be flung from the tree altogether. Think of jumping across a rooftop. Now, you may be able, with a running start, to do a 10-foot jump from rooftop to rooftop, barely making it. Now, think of your karma like a sack of cinder blocks on your back. Just one too many, and you have no chance of making that leap from chesed to bina. Thus, knowing your karma, your past lives, is but the first part. Once you have that knowledge, you have to learn how to use it to unburden yourself. Also, remember that this text is the final practice for the exempt adept. They have gone through all other grade work from student to neophyte to attainment of KCHGA. Even Liber Yod must be completed by an exempt adept prior to ThIShARB, and Liber Yod is quite lengthy in itself, so keep that in mind. This is not just for, a student barely studying the curriculum. Line 7 of ThIShARB is the bulk of the first practice, but we have to jump ahead of it and then come back to it. So let's go to verse 10, which continues on theory about discovering one's karma, mentioning the formula solve et coagula. After tracing your thread of karma through all of the key moments of your incarnations, you should have been able to determine a great deal about your nature. If you do eventually cross the abyss, this information about your nature is vital. The master of the temple appears as a star in the heavens to those in chesed. And according to Liber ThIShARB, that star is sent forth below the abyss and lands in the sphere and/or path best suited to their nature. If you don't know your nature, you will have no idea which sphere you would be sent to. This info is vital because it helps determine in all situations how you are to do this phase of the great work. That is, to guide all seekers on the path which is best suited to their nature, to help save our fellows from sickness and from old age and from death, and lead them to a life intense with knowledge and extreme bliss, which is untouched by any of the above maladies. To quote verse 10 of Liber ThIShARB and then move on, quote, in other words, he should discover what may be the nature of his work. Thus, Muhammad was a brother reflected into Netzach, Buddha a brother reflected into Hod, or as some say, Daf, knowledge. The present manifestation of Frater P to the outer is in Tifereth, to the inner in the path of Leo, end quote. To the outer means in the lower grades of AA, anybody below Tifereth, they would see Frater P as a master of the temple reflected in Tifereth, the sun. To those who have made knowledge and conversation, they would see Frater P on the path of Leo as his nature of helping them. With Leo, the path of Leo is Teth, right above Tifereth. So very solar still. Verse 11 gives us preliminary practices. After these, we shall go back to verse 7 and begin Alan Bennett's prescribed practice from the Training of the Mind, which is in the Equinox, Volume 1, Number 5. Verse 11, quote, first method. Let the exempt adept first train himself to think backwards by external means, as set forth here following. A. Let him learn to write backwards with either hand. B. Let him learn to walk backwards. C. Let him constantly watch, if convenient, cinematograph films and listen to phonograph records reversed, and let him so accustom himself to these that they appear natural and appreciable as a whole. D. Let him practice speaking backwards. Thus, for the term I am he, let him say, am I. Let him learn to read backwards. In this, it is difficult to avoid cheating oneself, as an expert reader sees a sentence at a glance. Let his disciple read aloud to him backwards, slowly at first, then eventually more quickly. F. Of his own ingenium, let him devise other methods. End quote. These practices all come down to honest dedication. A few hours a day for a month or two each point should suffice. If you do the max time for each practice, say 2 months, you could finish these preliminaries in about a year. Out of these preliminaries, for myself, I found that writing backwards appealed the most. For English speakers, what you should do, recommended for writing, would be beginning at the bottom right of the back of a notebook, and then write from the bottom left upwards. That's my preferred strategy. It takes time to think of what you wish to write and then spell it backwards. So I also recommend take a novel and copy it word for word backwards from the end to the beginning. Otherwise, come up with your own sentences and just the same thing from the bottom right of a notebook, right, left upwards. The practice of walking backwards I found easy enough to do in my apartment, and I even went to the local track at the park, sometimes lightly jogging backwards, and I added motions that made it appear like I was in reverse, such as the way my arms moved. If you watch films backwards, you'll see what I mean, and it was definitely my favorite preliminary. The head, legs, arms, they all move in a specific jerky motion going backwards, so learn to mimic that as you're walking backwards. At the time when I did this, I was not watching TV at all, save for 1 or 2 hours a week. I was just strictly reading, so this was a treat. The first movie I found online backwards in reverse was Disney's cartoon Aladdin, which, though I'm not getting human motions, I am seeing something in reverse with sound. So it was on YouTube, and as normally, Aladdin depicts a man in poverty finding a genie who sets him against evil Jafar, and at the end, this street rat, quote unquote, becomes engaged to the princess. Well, in reverse, Aladdin is much darker and almost a parody warning against playing with the Goetia or something like that. So the movie Aladdin backwards, we meet a wealthy prince who summons an evil jinn who curses him. And by the end of this reverse movie, this prince is poverty-stricken and homeless, which I found interesting. I watched several other movies. I listened to songs backwards. There's a lot of stuff online. You could find it very easily. Thanks to technology today, you could do all of these preliminary practices a lot easier, like especially listening to stuff. You don't have to play a record in reverse. Everything is online, so it's awesome. I recommend paying close attention to how people move, talk, and interact with objects, because you're going to have to create these visions in your mind of yourself in a moment. Many motions appear jerky, so when you see visions or do these preliminary practices, all of these visuals should help you greatly, so pay attention to them. Point D, preliminary, is speaking backwards. This is one of the hardest points. Let people know what you're doing, and even find a few different people you trust who can help you with this practice. You'll have to start off pausing when asked something to first think of your response and then formulate saying it backwards, spelling it out in your mind. You could either read the word backwards in your mind or else mimic the sound like a song backwards. With time, it will become a second language, and that's when you've actually made success in this. When you no longer have to think of it forward, you could just instantly think of it backwards because you've used that word or those sets of words so many times that it's now a language unto its own, and you actually think backwards. So you should start to memorize everything that you're saying and writing and thinking backwards. Point E, reading backwards. This is quite simple. And it doesn't matter if you retain the words. Just read them aloud backwards day in and day out and just keep going. So many books you could pick from. The last one, preliminary F. Come up and devise more methods. I'll just give one example. Think of anything you do routinely every day, and it has to have an order to it. So for example, if you clean your home from the top down, like you do shelves and door ledges first, and then windows and the last thing, or countertops, and then you do the floor, well, do it in reverse. Start from the floor and work your way up. Also, another example of routines backwards. Let's say making coffee. If you rinse and fill the pot first, then fill the water tank, then put the grinds in, get out your mug, etc., etc. Well, whatever order you do that routine of making coffee, try it in the backwards order. So in this case, you would get your mug out first, then you would put the grinds in the back, then you would You need to fill up the coffee pot still and fill the tank. You can't do that part in reverse, but still the rest of the order you can do in reverse. So think of things that you do routinely that have an order, right? So you could take the mug out first instead of taking out your mug last. So there are ways that you could do that. Be careful, as Crowley warns, your mind will try to trick you, acting like it is thinking backwards, but really just translating the forward into reverse. That's not good enough. You need your mind to actually work backwards. Through all of these practices, you want your unconscious mind fixed firmly on going backwards. You could even pretend to do things in full backwards motion. And you'll get this because doing things in such a reverse order is planting seeds in your unconscious that are going to eventually start to make it work in that manner. The unconscious manifests in the conscious. So like watching a movie and mimicking what you saw in reverse, you could act that out. Your unconscious is eventually going to become fine-tuned to this mode of thinking. And when it does, now we're ready to get into Alan Bennett's prescribed practice from Liber ThIShARB, from the equinox. So here, let me quote verse 7 of Liber ThIShARB. Quote, "The first method to be described has been detailed in Bhikkhu Anandamiteya's Training of the Mind," which is in Equinox Volume 1, number 5. "We have little to alter or to add. Its most important result, as regards to the oath of the abyss, is free from all desire or clinging to anything which it gives. Its second result is to aid the adept in the second method by supplying him with further data for his investigation." End quote. So here we're going to turn to Training of the Mind by Alan Bennett, of which a PDF is available in the description below or on Scans from the Equinox. In that PDF, we start on page 53 of the book, or the 26th out of 33 PDF pages, where we find the prescribed practice. Basically, be seated in your asana. Quote, "Think of yourself seated there. Then you begin to think backwards. You think the act of coming into the room. You think the act of walking towards that room. And so you go on thinking backwards on all the acts you have done that day. You then come to yourself waking up in the morning, and perhaps you remember a few dreams, and then there is a blank, and you remember your last thoughts as you went to sleep the night before, what you did before retiring for the night, and so on, back to the time of your last meditation." End quote. You may notice that sometimes while thinking backwards, your visions may return to going forward. It's just a distraction of the mind, and if that happens, just pause, recenter your mind, and continue on thinking everything backwards. I recommend doing this practice 3 to 4 times a day, and Liber Resh for myself is helpful for committing to doing a practice multiple times a day, as you're required to do a holy meditation after the second adoration. So it's a great way of periodically throughout the day setting yourself up to do this, for instance, 4 times a day. Keep in mind, this is a very difficult practice. Even for an adept, it takes daily practice day in and day out, full commitment for weeks and months until it eventually becomes easier. When it does get easy, instead of thinking back only a few hours to your last practice, continue on thinking backwards for a full day. When the full day is perfected, a week, a month, a year. Granted, you're not going to get every single detail. To think back over every detail for the course of a week at normal speed would take an entire week. Not possible. I recommend speeding up the visions, especially during still parts where you see yourself motionless. Also, as you progress, the further back you are going in each vision, the faster you should see it happen. I recommend each meditation of this text be between 1 to 2 hours. So if you're going backwards a full year over the course of 2 hours, you have to speed up your vision and skip the useless parts so that it fits in a 2-hour block. But you also can't go so fast that you cannot make out the details. So learn to determine what's important to this practice and what's not. That's going to come with experience. Continue back through all the years of your life. Quote, "You will find yourself remembering all sorts of things about your past life that you had quite forgotten. You will find yourself penetrating further and further into the period of deep sleep. You will find that you remember your dreams even far more accurately than you ever did before. And so you go on, going again and again over long periods of your life, and each time you will remember more and more of things you had forgotten. You will remember little incidents of your childhood. Remember the tears you shed over the difficult tasks of learning how to walk and speak. And at last, after long practice, long and hard practice, you will remember a little right back to the time of your birth. If you never get any further than this, you will have done yourself an enormous deal of good by this practice. You will have marvelously increased your memory in every respect, and you will have gained a very clear perception of the changing nature of your desires and mind and will." End quote. So 2 things here. The first, a little of my own experience. In early life, up to my teenage years, I had a lot of trauma. Though I have a very good memory, and much of my past is painful, and it's not that I've forgotten or pushed it into a blackout. I remember most of my childhood back to like 2 years old. I have memories. Before I did this practice, I even had vivid memories of childhood, and at times where most people have forgotten and can't remember things. But I consciously chose, on the most part, to avoid thinking about much of it because it comes with so much feeling. This practice quite literally forced me to remember and analyze many painful moments of my childhood and life in general. Even later on in life, the small things that, by a mistake here and there, are embarrassing to recall. Why did I say that? Oh, I shouldn't have made that joke. Oh, I misspoke at this thing. And, whatever it is, we all have those moments that we choose not to think of. This practice forced me to think of all of it. And I realized all of it must be processed. Else it controls you and your decisions in subtle and overt ways. Also, for many years, I could not remember my dreams. It was just, I'd go to sleep, and I'd wake up, and it was just rest. Whether I had dreams or not, I could not recall a single one of them. Very rarely. It was after I started dating my partner of almost 7 years, and unblocking my kundalini, and undertaking this practice very seriously, I suddenly began to recall the most vivid and even prophetic dreams that I've ever had. And then one night, bam, I suddenly had a very long dream outlining an entire lifetime of mine as a soldier in a warring Anglo-Saxon township. I recalled being a man, actually a soldier, and fighting against a neighboring village, our leaders against theirs. We won the first war, and became a booming city in short time with a large parapet. Another rival city also built itself up after winning small battles and eventually growing. Well, that rival city took notice of ours, and just as I had been married and had my second child, I recalled the love I had for that woman and our children. And then I was called to war again, but this time I was not just a grunt. I had just a slightly higher rank, not front lines, but not general or anything like that. Just second, second or third rank, as opposed to like front line being sent to the slaughter. I remember my sword and spear tasting blood as invaders tried to sack our city, but we fought them off, and then eventually we counterattacked, and then I was sent away and we conquered. I made it back home. And I remember the feeling of making it back home and seeing my kids had gone a year and a half older, and they had sprouted up. Well, I remembered the love I had for this partner, and I remember the fear that I had that, what if I don't make it back home after this fight? I remember waking up and processing all of this. And it's interesting that I had this full life, a love, a family, and that I had completely forgotten them. This dream made me reflect on the nature of life itself, almost as a dream, one we wake up from upon death into a new, and start all over again and again. I meditated deeply upon all aspects of this vision, and I try to draw from it all of the karma and life lessons I could. So I suggest, as you're doing this practice, do the same. If you ever have any visions of yourself in a past life, really try to draw everything you can from it, even if it's painful or, I don't know, whatever it is for you. So that's the first thing, my experience. Secondly, we all have blocks. By going through all of our memories of this life, we begin to open up things that we have truly been unable to see, whether it's about our personality in this life, in a past life, or experiences we had all but forgotten. See, I'll give you an example from Crowley. In the Confessions, he recounts, quote, "Before this council, there is a long gap of complete amnesia. I merely remember that I was Ko Hesuin, a disciple of Lao Tzu, the author of King Kang King, the classic of purity." which, by the way, I translated into English during this retirement. All I know is that somehow or other I made a great miss, forfeited my mastership, and had to climb the ladder again from the bottom. It is the shame and agony of this misstep which has prevented me from facing the memory so far." End quote. Making some misstep, Crowley claims to have delayed his progress for many incarnations. But it has been through doing past life regression during a retirement that he unblocked this particular memory of being Ko-Hesuin, a disciple of Lao Tzu. That he was so close to becoming what would be synonymous with a master of the temple in that incarnation, and then making a misstep that delayed his progress appears to have been shameful in his unconscious mind. Thus, he was unable to recall this memory for a long time, 100,000 incarnations, whatever it was. But discovering that he was capable of such a block due to shame, he could then root out the causes and make necessary adjustments. If you are unaware that you have a block, you cannot make a change. So this is one example of why these practices are so vital. Let's say for Crowley, he didn't realize that he was so susceptible to shame or embarrassment that he made a mistake, that he could not recall that memory until he finally broke through that block. Then he could see that that block is there. He could learn how to train himself. Okay, yeah, we all make mistakes. I don't have to be scared of the shame. I could remember it even though it's a shameful thing to me. Or remove the shame altogether. Why should I feel shame? So whatever it was for him, he needed to make an adjustment there based on his person. Next, Alan Bennett writes that when you can get back to the moment of your birth, you have completed the easy part. You have seen all that your brain has to show. Now it is time to think back beyond the moment of your birth. To do this, you are not seeing memories in your brain, but drawing off the records of your Sakharas have left on your brain. So to me, I think it is more likely that you're kind of drawing off your body of light. You do not want to draw off the Akashic records, as that's a whole other type of sight. Like how information can be written in crystals or how atomic particles carry their experience through space-time. Your body of light retains all experience it has undergone. It's like reflected into your aura. It's literally like your aura is like a mirror. It catches all of those reflections and records them. And that aura, your body of light, that's what's being transferred from incarnation to incarnation. So those reflections are there. You just have to learn how to tap into them. It's not in the meat brain that deteriorates and changes. Although that meat brain does carry the experiences in a sort of way too, but those could be dispersed, matter and particles everywhere. So you're not going to have all of those experiences in this new brain. It's not like the brain goes from person to person, but that body of light mostly does, more so than the meat part, the physical part. Your ego, your personality, your actions are always attached to the body of light. Thus, you could pull up memories from past lives from this source. You want to get to the core of your karma, bearing in mind, karma is not merely checks and balances. It's not a system that calculates good and bad. Karma is literally, it means action. It translates as action from Sanskrit. You want to see all of your actions through the ages and determine what you have gone through, because all of those experiences weigh on you and determine who you are, not only what you are drawn to, but how you act in any given situation. Your experiences shape who you are if you are not aware of the effect they have on you. Practice will make perfect, but if you keep at it, there will inevitably come a point where you can pierce through the veil of your birth and be catapulted into the minds of your previous incarnations. To quote Alan Bennett, quote, "One day you will suddenly find yourself remembering your death in your last life. This will be very painful, but it is important to get to that stage several times, because at the moment when a man comes very near to death, the mind automatically goes through the very process of remembering backwards that you have been practicing so long. And so, you can then gather clues to all the events of that last life." End quote. To continue on with Liber ThIShARB, verses 12 through 19 cover all of the warnings and nuances, as well as a variation or just a different wording of Alan Bennett's prescribed practice that we have just gone over. I do highly recommend reading everything thoroughly from 12 to 19 yourself, despite my best efforts to cover them. Crowley recommends doing just 5 minutes of each practice at first, and even when you work up to an hour, he says getting a perfect 5 minutes is better than doing hours poorly, and to that I do agree. Though, for myself, when I began this practice many years ago, I dove right off the high board from the beginning, going for at least an hour and a half each practice, several times a day, right from day one. So do what you feel you need to do as an individual, however it's going to help you. Verse 22 covers fact-checking your work. After getting to the moment of your birth, dozens of hundreds of times, eventually you will be catapulted into visions of previous incarnations. When you get a vision of a previous incarnation, look for details which can give you evidence that this was an authentic vision. Firstly, if you see a land that you have never been to, attempt to find out where it is in this world that you're now in this life, by looking for landmarks which you've never seen before. Back in Crowley's day, you would have had to have gone to that location and confirm if what you saw is actually there. But with today's technology, like Google Earth, you can go there in seconds, so that's super convenient. Liber ThIShARB instructs, quote, "If then the adept remember that he was in a previous life in some city, say Krakow, which he has in this life never visited, let him describe from memory the appearance of Krakow and of its inhabitants, setting down their names. Let him further enter into details of the city and its customs, and having done this with great minuteness, let him confirm the same by consultation with historians and geographers, or by a personal visit." End quote. Alternatively, seek out information in the person's mind which you could have no way of knowing yourself, and then try to confirm it. Words used in a very specific context which you have never heard before, especially if the person spoke a foreign language. This can be great towards this end. If in this past incarnation you spoke another language, search the person's mind if possible and seek for information only they would have known, and then confirm if it's just your imagination making up words or if the information they possess is in fact authentic. Lastly, emotionally charged memories are most likely to be seen as well as triggered. After doing this practice for a long enough time, doing simple asana, having a dream, or even seeing something while going about your business can trigger a vision. I will say, like in psychology, PTSD, people remember that traumatic moment because for some reason, the brain, when you're having an emotional experience, your memory goes into hyperdrive and you start to record things very vividly. So I would imagine it's the same thing for everybody. I know it is for me, but I'm just assuming that most people would remember emotionally charged events or very impactful events over, say, brushing their teeth, which is something you do every day, and you're not going to remember the nuances of brushing your teeth in the same way every single day. But let's say you got into a big fight and got really hurt, you're going to remember that day. So it's the same way with past life stuff. The day you were really happy in a past life, the day you were really sad in a past life, you're going to remember what caused that feeling. It's just how the brain picks up information. So just be prepared for that, but it's also my experience, and just be prepared. If you get a vision of any previous incarnation, always be very skeptical, most especially if it's a famous person. Now, not everybody, but most people, our egos, always want us to be more than we are. Psych wards are riddled with Jesus Christs and Cleopatras. At present, fraternal bodies are riddled with Aleister Crowleys. The point of getting information about previous incarnations is not to fuel the ego. You're not going to get credit in this life because you did something great in a past life. This practice is done predominantly for one reason only: to gain insight into your karma, your sankharas. By seeing what you have been through, you can see where you are potentially going. And as I said before, after crossing the abyss, one's nature determines which sphere and/or path on the tree of life that as a master of the temple, they will be sent forth, from which they're going to do their great work. That's the purpose of this practice, to determine your nature, to learn about yourself. Not to find out, I was the great poobah, and now everybody has to bow to me. It's like, no, are you the great poobah this life? If not, you're not getting bowed to. What have you done now? What you did in the past is only important to you. That's the bottom line there. It is vital to remember that no matter who we were in a past life, that person is gone. Their experiences should not be so important enough to dwell on, past the karma that we have before us. We need to know more about their character than anything they've done anyways, as their character may still be a part of who we are now, and that can either be a hindrance or used at our disposal if we can figure out what we're good at, what we're bad at, what attracts us, and what we need to steer clear of. Past that, it's not so important that it shouldn't be the most important thing to you. It should just help you learn about yourself. As Crowley said about being the Eliphas Levi, whether it's true or not, when we see our past lives, we are able to retain some of that person's memory and compare their character with our own, which should then be synonymous, and thereby learn more about ourselves. That's what this is about. So, after practicing the above stuff and receiving the desired information about our sankharas, our karma, our character, our nature, verse 24 concludes the first method of Liber ThIShARB, quote, all this being perfected so that the memory reaches back into aeons incalculably distant, let the exempt adept meditate upon the fruitfulness of all those years and the fruit thereof, serving that which is transitory and worthless from that which is eternal. Eternal, we're looking for that divine spark and how it's been affected through our incarnations. And it may be that he, being an exempt adept, may hold all to be savorless and full of sorrow. End quote. This is good. This is good information. It's true. We may yield fruit from knowing the past, or we may find that all experience is worthless, and we may learn that the only way forward is through detachment in a Buddhist sense. Not to mention, we should look at how and why a particle of God, the light, incarnated as we have seen, and why it needed those experiences. To hold on too tightly to the past may cause depression, just as tripping about what's going to happen in the future often causes anxiety. Plus, keep in mind, seeing death after death with no end of incarnations in sight may exacerbate the vision of sorrow, which is Buddhist suffering. However, if one has thoroughly performed Liber HHH, the second practice, conquering death completely, they may see joy, as it says in Liber LXV chapter 2. Quote, the swan being silent, he answered, then, if with no goal, why this eternal journey? And I laid my head against the head of the swan and laughed, saying, is there not joy ineffable in this aimless winging? Is there not weariness and impatience for who would attain to some goal? And the swan was ever silent. Ah, but we floated in infinite abyss. Joy, joy, white swan, bear thou ever me up between thy wings. End quote. Now, we're going to look at the second and last method of Liber ThIShARB. First are some more preliminary practices, quite complementary to the second method of Liber Yod, where the hermit meditates upon their body and mind to consider what they truly are as a spiritual being. So let's ThIShARB quote verse 27. Let him seated in his asana consider any event and trace it to its immediate causes, and let this be done very fully and minutely. Here, for example, is a body erect and motionless. Let the adept consider many forces which maintain it. Firstly, the attraction to the earth, of the sun, of the planets, of the farthest stars, nay, of every mote of dust in the room, one of which, could it be annihilated, would cause that body to move, although so imperceptibly. Also, the resistance of the floor, the pressure of the air, and all other external conditions. Secondly, the internal forces which sustain it, the vast and complex machinery of the skeleton, the muscles, the blood, the lymph, the marrow, all that makes up a person. Thirdly, the moral and intellectual forces involved, the mind, the will, the consciousness. Let him continue with this unremitting ardor, searching nature, leaving nothing out. End quote. So here is a meditation very closely linked with biological physics pertaining to the internal and external conditions which cause one to function at any given time. The ideas listed above about one in meditation and how their body props them up and the air and gravity puts pressure upon their body to keep it on earth, these are just examples. You could choose other stuff or you could use that. You could pick any activity and do this same meditation, think everything out. Whether the idea is sitting in meditation or running, playing a game, acting on stage, reading a book, or anything else, the method of this practice is the same. You're trying to connect the internal and external conditions which make an activity possible. As above, so below. So what's happening in the universe and what's happening inside your body. It's helpful, too, to bear in mind that occultism is a study of self, the universe, and God. Yourself, the universe, and God. That's what we are focusing on in occultism. Thus, this is one of the best and most profound ways of observing every detail that makes existence possible. It is a way of examining as above, so below, from a mundane standpoint of self and the world. So you're going to keep this practice going until you have examined as many possible factors which affect existence. Do this, I don't know, as much as you need to. Pick as many different activities and consider them very carefully. But you'll know when to stop, because it will eventually lead you to critically thinking questions you wouldn't normally have noticed as you go about in your normal affairs. So for example, while I was writing this, I was taking the train and started to reflect upon when I did this practice. Suddenly, I began thinking of the electricity powering the motion of the train that I was on as I was commuting, the friction of the wheels on the rails, the wind billowing around the outside of the car, the gravity keeping me leaning against the train door, how I am in motion so that if I jumped, I'm not going to slam against the back of the train, and many, many other things. So when your mind starts to work in that capacity as you're going about your normal life, and it becomes a constant so that you're constantly questioning what is the nature of reality, you're getting there. Also, I highly recommend either taking a few courses in general relativity, possibly even quantum physics, or at the very least, watching a bunch of videos about physics online. PBS Spacetime has good lectures, or you could look at lectures by physicists. All of that goes a long way in helping with this particular verse. This being done, the next preliminary is as follows, quote, "Next, let him take one of the immediate causes of his position and trace out its equilibrium. For example, the will. What determines the will to aid in holding up the body erect and motionless? This being discovered, let him choose one of the forces which determined his will, and trace out that in similar fashion, and let this process be continued for many days until the interdependence of all things is a truth assimilated in his inmost being." End quote. This is a little obscure, so to use the example, if your will, right, we're going to use will as an example. If your will is to sit and do these meditations, what caused that will to occur? Was it a need for attainment, or was it something else? You have to find out and trace that to why you had that need. What caused the cause of that need, and on until you get to the crux of this particular verse. How the universe operates just to allow you to do your will. From energy, to motion, to karma, to gravity, to space, time, matter, particles, nerve pulses, everything has to operate just so in order to allow a person to do something at some given time. Even the energy we feed our body to allow it to do this meditation is dependent upon someone who grew the food, cleaned it, packaged it, shipped it, maybe even cooked it for you in exchange for money which you earned through some other means that you are capable of doing. And even then, the person who grew your food is totally dependent upon the soil, bugs, and the sun, and a million other factors which gave the vegetation the energy it needed to grow. Eventually, after you've done this practice, taking concept by concept and determining what caused what, eventually, we arrive at a sense of extreme universal interdependence. No person can do everything. There simply isn't enough time nor capability. A person cannot fly on their own. However, you can fly if you build a plane, or if somebody else builds a plane. But if it's not your will to build that plane, you're dependent upon who that person was that's capable of building the engines and the wings and whatever the case is. So there's just simply not enough time to learn all of how to do everything and then actually do it for yourself. Like, it's just impossible. But with society as we have today, we are free to focus on that which we are most suitable to do, while others do that which they are most suitable to do. And if we could get to that point where everybody figures out what they should be doing, our species could function as one whole beautiful body, all helping each other, just as the universe operates in that fashion. From gravitational pulls of the planets around stars, and black holes keep things in place, and dark matter keeps things slowly expanding, and gravity keeps things contracting, and just everything's operating as it needs to. Our species can operate in that way. How the light of a star has grown food, or the gravitational pull keeps our planet spinning as it does so that our lives could continue. We're all dependent upon something for our life to exist. So everything is interdependent. This practice gets to the point of that interdependence. And when you could truly realize what that means, you've completed this line. Verse 30, quote, "This being accomplished, let him trace his own history with special reference to the causes of each event." End quote. Here, this verse instructs to neglect universal forces, PS, such as physics, as well as spiritual forces. Don't look for this, right? So this being accomplished, let him trace his own history with special reference to the causes of each event. We're looking from physical event point of views, and we're not going to go into universal factors, such as the sun being there, which allows the planet to be here. No, we're going much smaller than that. If you got paid for a paycheck, what did you do to earn that paycheck? What did the person who paid you do to get that money to give to you? Things like that that are more mundane and closer to the human experience as opposed to the universal. As you're doing this particular meditation, connect the dots from event to event which led up to it, all the way from what led you to perform the great work. But do not neglect things such as where in the world you are as you do it, and why you chose to be in that location as opposed to somewhere else. Everything here should be a variable and considered. Say you had an important meeting at your job, for example. Trace back to why you were chosen for that position which led you to be in that meeting. Back to why you applied for that particular job. Back to why that job in the place that you're at as opposed to that job somewhere else. Consider things in that fashion. Right? The last preliminary is, day by day, ask a question and consider most deeply the answer. Crowley gives an example of why there is water on the face of the earth. Gravity, evolution, combinations of chemicals, etc. But also consider more abstract things. Pose questions like, here you could go spiritual. Why is Mercury associated with such things as the Word of God, Scripture, wisdom? Here you have a wealth of ideas that you could draw off and consider every single day. And this you could do just once a day and consider that question until you get the full answer. If it takes one day, then pick another question. If it takes several days, and you could do that, just constantly playing out in your head. You don't necessarily have to be in asana, though you can sit for asana and spend extra time solely dedicated to this. But you could do it while you're going about your mundane business as well. And maybe something will trigger an answer as you're going about your mundane life. The universe, if you're doing your will, the inertia of the universe will assist you. So it could be that you pick a question, you consider it in asana, and then as you finish your asana and you're going about your day, you're still mulling it over and trying to answer it. And as you get new bits of information that you've thought up, write them down. You may be going about your business and you see something, or somebody randomly passing by says something to you that triggers the next answer to that question. It's just the universe operates like that when you're doing magic sometimes. So just keep your eyes and ears open. This verse closes by saying, you do this for months until you come to a point that all is inertia, meaning you need to find the love and wonder in everything. The unity which ultimately makes you look at anything with a sense of awe so powerful that it is mind-numbing, until you start to see that the universe has opened up and allowed you to walk the path of your true will. That's the point of this practice. And finally, the second method. So those were all preliminaries. Quote, having then perfected in his mind these conceptions, let him apply them to his own career, forging the links of memory into the chain of necessity. And let this be his final question. To what purpose am I fitted? Of what service can my being prove to the brothers of the AA if I cross the abyss and am admitted to the city of the pyramids? End quote. So now you're going to again focus on yourself and your magical career. And you're going to link the chains of memory to the necessity to become a master of the temple. That's the final part of this practice. Again, mind you, this is for an exempt adeptus practice, and its conclusion says in the text several times it leads directly to swearing the oath of the abyss. All of this work has led to this final consideration. Being able to trace a thread through all of the events of this and previous incarnations, my recommendation is this. Find the hand of the Holy Guardian Angel in every single event that has ever occurred directly, indirectly, internally, or externally to you as an individual. The Master of the Temple has several primary jobs. They're worth considering in answering the above question. One Star in Sight says, quote, The master of the temple's principal business is to tend his garden of disciples and to attain a perfect understanding of the universe. He is a master of samadhi, end quote. The books Aha and also Liber Lucis describe the functions of the MT. The MT seeks to understand all things. They are a scientist. They lead their group of disciples. Great, that much is clear. But they are also responsible for receiving the word of the Magus and then delivering it unto mankind. The word of the law being the Lema, the word of the Aeon being Abrahadabra. Consider then what your true will is, and if it is fit, if it is aligned with the breaking of the chains of the old Aeon and living the book of the law, to be a beacon of light to seekers. How does your true will, your own inherent nature, meld with this objective? In what other ways can you devise to be of service in this fashion? Being a master of samadhi, the master of the temple has the ability to see everything as interconnected and interdependent. Everything happening simultaneously is but a component of what the vulgar call God. So, tracing all of those events in one's life means that everything that happened was God experiencing itself. Thus, all of it was necessary for that particular particle to go through an alchemical process of development, of experience. In regards to crossing the abyss, every skill, every defect, every experience through your incarnations must ultimately be scrutinized and thought about in regards to why you would cross the abyss and how it will be of service not only to the world, but to the brothers of AA. Once you have done this, the text says you are ready. Crowley claims in verse 37, it was upon reflection, after being thrown from a horse over a cliff high enough to kill anyone easily, that he got up without a scrape. He then realized how many near-death experiences he had had in this particular incarnation. Now, my assumption to his line of thinking was that if God carried him this far, the reason was that he needed to take that final jump from the heights down to the lows of the abyss, and that he would make it to the other side. Now, there's no rule of thumb for any other person. No other's experience will help you in these considerations because we are all unique and individual. Yet, I do believe that sharing that insight about Crowley should in some way help you in getting that creative aspect flowing in your endeavors to understand your true will and whether you are suited one day to cross the abyss yourself, which is beyond most of us, right? That is very far on the path, you know. If you're not there yet, don't focus primarily on that now. Focus on where you're at now, but I think it's still interesting to consider, you know, at least theoretically. And just keep in mind, if you are at that point, it's an irrevocable step. And with one small miscalculation, unsurety, or missed piece of information, you can hurt yourself. Still, there's hope. Now, not to grade work or anything, but this is just me in my mundane life. We all have hard stuff that we go through, scary stuff, things we still have fear about, whatever. I look at where I was when I found the Lema, and my particular experiences, I was in a very low point of life, and I trusted once I discovered Nuit, and that I knew she was in my life as a mother figure. I knew that for myself, she had helped me out of that low point up to a much better, higher point where I'm at now. And if she had carried me that far, because I was willing to not only allow her to carry me, but to use my own legs to walk with her, that, you know, when something is hurting and I'm going through life's pains and trials, tribulations, she's not just gonna dump me just because. She's not cruel in that manner. So I always trust that if she's helped me get this far, she's gonna help me get through whatever it is that's troubling me at that next point. So I think that's just helpful for most people if you have that connection with a particular deity, that you feel like they're helping guide you or lift you up when you're down or give you growing pain so that you could grow from them. They're not just going to dump you. The only way you're going to get dumped is if you walk away. Your personal deity is never going to do that to you, you know, unless you really fuck up or like you insult it in some type of way. But if you're actually doing the work, if you're actually trying, you know, you may be going through a low point. However, you have a potential in every low point to grow drastically from. So just, you know, when things are happening, they're not happening to you. They're happening for you, is how I like to look at it. So we all have hard shit that we don't know how to handle as humans, right? Something happens for the first time to us. It's new, it's scary, but we can grow from it. And for me, Nuit is never going to just drop me. I believe that I'm resting on her shoulder. She's holding me. And when I can, I walk with her. So, love is the law, love under will. I hope this was enjoyable. This was an awesome text. Yeah, I'll see you all in the next one.